Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Forum Daily West. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. Trump's administration moves to end affirmative action in federal contracting and cut DEI staff. Plus, legislative reporter Tyler Dawson discusses Premier Smith's defense of Alberta amid tariff threats. And a frigid storm blankets New Orleans with snow. Thanks so much for joining us. Liberal leadership candidates Mark Carney and Chandra Arya have submitted their paperwork to enter the race ahead of tomorrow's deadline. The two appear to be the first through the gate, submitting the required signatures and a $50,000 deposit. Candidates have until Thursday at 5 p.m. to get their deposit in, along with a written nomination with signatures of 300 registered Liberals. Karina Gold is planning on getting her papers and deposit in by the deadline, while Chrystia Freeland's campaign did not respond to inquiries. Two more candidates also declared their intention to enter the race today, including former Brampton MP Ruby Dalla and Michael Clark, a self-described Christian community organizer and businessman who is campaigning to, quote, make the party pro-life. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation has released the results from their annual survey. Its aim was to hear from Canadians what their priorities are for 2025. The survey found that 91% want to reverse the capital gains tax hike, 94% want to scrap the carbon tax, 72% want to defund the CBC, 97% oppose a home equity tax, and 93% say government bureaucrats need a salary cut. Arlene Dickinson, star of the show Dragon's Den and a member of the Canada-U.S. Relations Advisory Council, says her former co-star Kevin O'Leary does not speak for Canada with the Trump administration. She also urges Alberta Premier Danielle Smith to put the interests of Canadians first in negotiations with the U.S. president. Smith has refused to get on board with the Team Canada approach unless the federal government exempts energy from its retaliation plans.
I don't know that it's helpful. I don't believe it is. I mean, Kevin O'Leary isn't authorized to speak on behalf of Canadians, and I frankly don't believe he is speaking on behalf of Canadians with what he's saying. I mean, if he was negotiating on our side, I think that would be, totally fine, but he's not. He's negotiating against us, so I don't think it's a helpful solution right now.
It seems that there's maybe one person missing at the table. It's a big province, Alberta, Danielle Smith. What do you think about how she's been playing the game right now?
I'm an Albertan. I think that it's really important that we all speak together as one voice. In this situation, this isn't about any provincial interests. This is about the interests of us as a nation. And I think it's incredibly important that we absolutely negotiate as one nation together.
Well, as we know, Canada is divided in its plan to deal with the impending U.S. tariffs. A huge point of contention is Canada's energy exports to the U.S. There has been talk of Ottawa placing an export tax on Alberta oil and gas, which would direct money to Ottawa, not Alberta. So the province is looking to create a public body that would buy all private oil and gas intended for export to the U.S., protecting Alberta from the federal export tax. As one Canadian government cannot tax another. Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, gives us the details.
It is true that the government can't tax things, twice, basically. It's less clear, I think, whether or not that would apply in this case, as in, does the Alberta government simply declaring all this oil is theirs, does that exempt them from federal taxation powers? It would not surprise me to see some of these sort of attempts made by the Alberta government. I don't think it's clear cut that that's going to succeed. But then, you know what, from a political perspective in Alberta, that doesn't necessarily matter. I mean, maybe from a business and economics perspective, that stuff really matters. But at least part of what Danielle Smith needs to do is to be seen standing up for Alberta's largest industry.
Well, Donald Trump's recent threats to impose tariffs on several countries, including Canada, continue to generate reactions among Canadian political experts. Lars Holstrom, professor of political science at the University of Lethbridge, explains what would happen if Trump followed through on that threat, especially in the economic area of southern Alberta.
Albertans, of course, are worried about the primacy of oil and gas as a revenue stream for the province. So if we see declining revenues, that's going to trigger probably a deficit budget for us. So of course it makes sense to prioritize the Albertan interest and the Albertan industrial interest, even if it means not necessarily playing in full kit with Team Canada. Let's remember, Donald Trump is a bit unpredictable in terms of what he actually does. He says a lot, he's signed a lot, but we don't actually know where things will play out.
Newly elected MLA for Lethbridge West, Rob Miyashiro, was sworn into the legislature Monday after winning the Lethbridge West by-election in December. Miyashiro will now serve the NDP caucus in his new role as senior advisor for the nonprofit sector. Miyashiro spoke with BCN about what it was like being introduced to the legislature for the first time.
You know, I'm more excited about it now almost than I was kind of nonchalant before, thinking, oh, this will be over in a few minutes, and then we can just meet with friends and family and caucus. And when the lieutenant governor is speaking directly to me and my family, and the speaker is speaking directly to me and my family about the responsibilities and about the journey we're embarking on, it was very special and almost overwhelming to me. At one point, I realized, this is for me, and because the other MLAs, when they get sworn in en masse, they don't. It's not the same kind of intimate gathering. So, yeah, very fortunate to be able to experience that. Excited about being up in Edmonton. A little bittersweet about leaving my position at LSEO, but very excited to get started in my role.
In related news, Alberta NDP leader Naheed Nenshi expects to be officially nominated as the NDP's candidate for the Edmonton Strathcona riding after former Premier Rachel Notley officially stepped down as MLA on December the 30th. The Lethbridge Public Library is expanding access to the community by introducing a temporary pop-up book stop inside the Labour Club Ice Centre. Residents with a valid library card can check out and return books at the arena that is completely self-service. The library says they may plan to bring in more book stops or a permanent option in the city if this trial project is popular in the community.
The library partnered with City of Lethbridge Recreation and Culture. We really wanted to find a location that people were already visiting in the city. We really wanted to explore co-location opportunities because, again, our goal is really to provide access, and so we want to be where people already are. We're focusing on the north side because the north side was identified in the library's facilities master plan as an underserved area in the city. So it's really our first priority is to see how we can better serve north side residents.
The book stop at Labour Club Ice Centre will remain up until mid-April, but an extension into summer is also being considered. Fire codes exist to protect people in their homes, workplaces, and public places. After the fires in Los Angeles, many began thinking about building codes. The Lethbridge Fire and Emergency Services Chief Troy Hicks says there are federal buildings and federal codes. Hick also says each province develops its own codes based on the federal code. He explains how the process works in Alberta and in Lethbridge.
So Alberta does have a national fire code and a national building code, Alberta edition. These are the codes that are used. The building code is a code that is used when developing new properties, new infrastructure. It does take into effect the fire code as well, but that's for the building code. And then what happens is once the building is built and occupied, then the fire code takes effect. So the fire code is like a maintenance manual. It's what gives myself and all of our inspectors the rules of what we're supposed to look for, what type of safety systems are supposed to be maintained and how they're supposed to be maintained, what kind of storage we can have in these buildings. So the fire hydrants here in the city, same thing, they are built up to code. There is a code that will say the requirement for how many hydrants have to be. There is a listing on how close a fire hydrant has to be to a private property, how close it has to be to a business. And there's also, these hydrants are tested annually to make sure they are given off the right flow, that if we show up with our fire trucks or any of our apparatus we hook up, we are going to have the water there we need.
According to Stats Canada, the National Fire Code establishes fire protection requirements for the safe use and maintenance of buildings, including references to design and construction. Immigrants in large U.S. cities have been preparing for mass arrests since Trump won the election back in November. He signed an executive order Monday declaring a national emergency at the U.S.-Mexico border, causing all illegal entry to be immediately halted and beginning the return of millions of what he referred to as criminal aliens. Aaron Ortiz Santos, an Atlanta-based lawyer who specializes in immigration cases, says many of his clients have been anxious.
Even if they are DACA holders, TPS holders, they have a work permit, they are afraid. They are worried about to stop the TPS or close the DACA, or what if we have another situation, they can stop or cancel my work permit. Part of the problem is that here in Georgia, it's unlawful driving without license.
Well, south of the border, it didn't take him long, but President Donald Trump on Monday pardoned, commuted the prison sentences, or vowed to dismiss the cases of all 1,500 plus people charged with crimes in the January 6, 2021 takeover of the U.S. Capitol building.
A full presidential pardon, that's what we got. Nobody gets those, people like me. I'm just a working man, dude. People like us don't get presidential pardons because we don't donate. You know, in the past years, I'm not saying it's all corrupt, but it's mostly corrupt. Hunter Biden got a presidential pardon, you know what I'm saying? And people are freaking out about us getting a presidential pardon.
President Donald Trump's administration is moving to end affirmative action in federal contracting and is directing that all federal diversity, equity, and inclusion staff be put on paid leave and eventually be laid off. The Associated Press has more on this story.
The move follows an executive order Trump signed on his first day, ordering a sweeping dismantling of the federal government's diversity and inclusion programs that could touch on everything from anti-bias training to funding for minority farmers and homeowners. That step is the first salvo in an aggressive campaign to upend DEI efforts nationwide, including leveraging the Justice Department and other agencies to investigate private companies pursuing training and hiring practices that conservative critics consider discriminatory against non-minority groups such as white men. Trump has called the programs, quote, discrimination and insisted on restoring strictly, quote, merit-based hiring. The order will immediately gut Joe Biden's wide-ranging effort to embed diversity and inclusion practices in the federal workforce, the nation's largest at about 2.4 million people.
Moving our eyes over to Los Angeles now. Aerial drone footage shows the burnt landscape of Altadena, California, after fire crews were able to contain a big portion of the Eden fire, one of several wildfires that displaced Los Angeles County residents in January. And some of the same wildfire victims who lost their homes have now become volunteers in a remarkable outpouring of love for their suffering neighbors. Stan Jeter from the Global News Alliance has more.
As victims of the Los Angeles wildfires line up for help in this church parking lot,
and know that we've been praying for you all.
Volunteers load up the cars with essentials, even as they cope with their own losses.
Our whole block had been burned. Our whole neighborhood, when we went back the very next day, had been burned, and fires were still blazing.
One Pasadena resident had just finished purchasing her house.
I paid off my house on January the 7th. The last payment hit the system, and my house burned down on January 8th. And financial blessings, people giving is definitely going to help us rebuild, because I can't sell my property.
These are people who have lost their homes. There are churches that have burned down to the ground. Their pastor has come to be with us, to pray with us, and to be here, to be hands and feet and to give to others as well.
As the fire approached her home, Tonita Fernandez says her kids were panicking, so she rushed them to safety.
And I was going to come back the next morning, but what I got instead was calls from neighbors and friends and family saying, oh, your house burned down.
Christian humanitarian organization World Vision has delivered truckloads of survival items to area churches for congregations to distribute to their own communities.
See the truck pulled up, 52-footer with tons of supplies for our community. It was such a blessing.
It's beautiful to see the church pulling together and offering our expertise, our resource, but helping hands. You know, early on, in moments like this, you just need practical, hands-on support.
And the victims turned volunteers are sharing a valuable lesson.
So even though we've lost everything, I want them to know that we can rebuild. And this is the beginning of rebuilding.
Stan Jeter, Global News Alliance.
Turning our eyes to the city of New Orleans now. Well, it can actually be called the city that has seen it all. A winter storm blanketed the Big Easy in fresh snow. To the west, the first ever blizzard unfolded in parts of Louisiana and Texas. Mid-city New Orleans recorded 9.5 inches of snow by Tuesday evening. Many roadways were impassable, classes were canceled in local schools, and many businesses could not open as snowfall essentially brought New Orleans to a standstill. The storm prompted the National Weather Service to issue the first ever blizzard warning for southwest Louisiana and southeast Texas. That is your Forum Daily West report. I'm Jeanette Roche. Thanks so much for watching.